for example, I have forms that might be pitted against each other, and duality is something that I think about a lot. And we think about that spiritually, like we live with this duality from the time we're born, but we're really not in this dual. I mean, this is millennia people pushing a duality, but there's the oneness of everything that I believe in. And I have this duality plays out because we're always seemingly pitted against each other. And
Right.
then maybe there's this little moment that comes along or you can find in the thing that gets you away from that. This things pitted against each other. And that's direct duality, right? Like you don't like me, I don't like you. What are we going to do about it?
Good day, listeners. This is CJMiller, your spiritual artist. I'm so excited today. I just got back from a spiritual art retreat here in Texas, and I'll be honest with you, I'm a little slow. It was so incredible. So many exercises we did and such great bonding. But boy, it does take it out of you a little bit. And so I'm a little slow, and I want to apologize to my listeners too, because it's been a couple weeks. I've let slack on interviews because I was getting ready for that retreat. I didn't have time to do some podcast interviews, but we are starting with a bang here. So let me introduce today's guest. First, I'd like to share with you when someone reaches out to me from far off on the globe, and I think that New York is far off on the globe, or from Ireland or from the UK, and they write me a note and say how much my book has shifted their way of thinking or moved them, it really, really moves my heart. Uh, it really makes me feel like I'm doing what I need to do and making a difference. So let me introduce Fred Fleisher. He is originally from Pennsylvania, and he has lived in the New York metropolitan area for 25 years. After enlistment in the Army, he earned an MFA from Queens College, CUNY, and a BFA in painting and drawing, and a BS in art education from Penn State University, which is really interesting. Fred doesn't know this, but I'm from Pittsburgh, so that's really interesting. So I grew up in Pittsburgh, so I almost went to Penn State. His work has been represented by galleries, both nationally and internationally, and he's had a recent solo exhibitions in Brooklyn and New York City. He has been included in a number of 2- and 3-persons exhibitions and numerous group exhibitions while working with curators in the art world. He organizes and curates exhibitions, and he is an assistant professor at SUNY Old Westbury. So I love when I talk to teachers because teachers have such a way of seeing the world. But I'm really excited about Fred because he liked the book so much. So we're going to talk about how he works and how he thinks. So good afternoon, Fred. How are you?
Great. Thank you so much, CJ. Thanks for having me here. I'm doing all right, and I hope you are too.
I
Uh,
am. I am. Go ahead.
I really have to say, just at the outset, to thank you for having me, but also that, when I reach out to you and from the book, and I'd like to talk a bit about, how that came about, how I got to it, but that you're responsive to that, which I think it's just, in a sense, kind of like a community, which is something that you build. And I know it's a big part of, I would say it's a big part of how you might think, is how I think, but people who are responsive to that really means a lot. It really means a lot. Like there's someone who has, first of all, I like your work, your paintings, and I follow you on Instagram. But to have someone then with the accessibility of a book that's communicating even more, someone's like, yeah, I'll take some time to acknowledge that and reach out to you. I really can't thank you enough for that. And I'm sure many, many people feel the same way too.
Oh, well, thank you. Um, I hope they do. I think everybody, when, as you know, when you do art, right, you always wonder, is it reaching someone?
Yeah.
And I put my passion into this art, and is it reaching someone? And I'm really excited to talk about your art too, because it's so whimsical. And I'm excited to hear how you describe what category, what discipline you would call your art. And it's something that I would be challenged to do, I think. So I also I'm in awe of what you do, because it's truly, you can see a lot of thought put into it. So tell us a little bit about your work.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, it's interesting because if I, start the conversation about my work first by saying, in some cases, some of the whimsy that's there, and some of it's very direct, but also is kind of plays around as an undercurrent that, in parts of the way we look at the world that aren't so whimsical, I try, and I think that's actually maybe part of my soul's connection to spirit in a way, is to have some humorous elements that can play out in the work. In fact, I have some notes here. They would be present in your own process. From your book, I was thinking about that a little bit. Like, so how does my process fit? And one of the ways that happens is elements of humor. Sometimes it can be cynical too, like, or it can mask a cynicism that's there, which the world is there. But I try to think about whimsy or humor, even though there's some wacky, and funky things that I'll try to put together, because that's part of my grasp at hope for things. Uh, you know, um, you look at the world on any given day, it could be kind of deconstructing the powers that exist. And you have to find a way to get through those things. And so, I look at humor sometime, and I try and weave that in, maybe as an element of hope in a way.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that hope is actually a component in my work for sure. And that comes out sometime in just funky, weird things.
I'm going to
Which I'm
encourage the
not afraid to
listeners.
say.
Yeah, I'm going to encourage the listeners to follow you on Instagram and see your work. And so, what are you? Do you teach that style? Is that what you teach?
Well, what I teach right now, I actually, for this past year that's finishing up, I've been the department chair. We have department chair every 3 years, and I'm finishing my 6th year full-time as assistant professor. So very often what I will be teaching, though, is this semester I'm teaching painting 1 and painting 2, and there would be a 3rd class. But because I'm the chair, I get a course release. But then I have taught Intro to Color, which is something that I'll teach in the fall as well. Creative thinking, drawing, and many courses I've taught. Some of the, they're all rewarding, but some that I really like to teach when I do teach them is when we have at SUNY Old Westbury, which makes it a kind of a unique program. We'll mentor a group of students on their way to their final shows that they have. So I can really talk to students as they're developing their ideas, kind of help them or foster what they're doing. And then, it'll get handed on to another professor for another semester. And in the end, the students will have a show. And sometimes I've worked with those students when they put their shows together. And then to see that whole process unfold, I think is quite wonderful to see. When
Oh,
I'm
that's
teaching painting, it's just as wonderful though, because I start out that no one's going to know what painting is, instead of making assumptions. And we'll work with looking at objects and thinking about color and form and value. And then by the end, we get into abstraction, a little bit. So people don't realize that painting's only just one thing at all.
well, that's interesting because when you look at your work, I don't, and maybe I'm wrong, right? But it doesn't look like you sit there and think it out, like in the sense that you're like, I'm going to place this here and this here. It feels so free. It feels very like you're in the moment and you're reacting and you're just feeling something. And
Well,
so yeah, go ahead.
I appreciate that. I mean, I actually, something will spring to mind, and I'm sure this is probably the case with just so many people. And it's like, all right, how's this going to play out? What's going to happen with this? And yeah, I can really start to I'm doing this here kind of below the camera view, but I'll play around with things, or I'll put things together, or sometimes they're found objects or clay figures. And I will let that process happen and be a little spontaneous, and then try and put it together and then see if I can keep, if it's a vignette, for example, of a painting of some funky things, see if I can keep that spirit kind of happening, within the work, because that's kind of a reflection of, kind of who I am too. Not, I mean, I plan things, and sometimes I don't, and then I pay for that. But I also really like, to just allow an energy to kind of unfold and see what happens.
Well, I like that because it's kind of what I talk about in my book is I really want you to be present and just and reacting to the canvas, right? You just feel it, draw it, react to it, and this kind of listen, react, and your work is what would you call it? Would you call it mixed media? What
That's what I say, like mixed media, although I do like to focus on two-dimensional work like painting, but I really get involved in sculpture and installation work as well. And I try and marry those together. Sculptures will become characters and paintings. Um, but yeah, even within a painted surface, sometime I'll mix media. I've used glitter and spray paint and things before. So the notion of mixed media on a canvas is there, but then also like whatever I can, like I like to state, like whatever I put my hands on to communicate what I want to do, that's kind of how I do that, which can lend itself to some spontaneity as well. And I will say, the mark making chapter, the 30-minute exercise, I think that's connected to the Twyla Tharp creative habit, right? When you bring her up in that, I have been doing more and more now the work isn't going to be, say, formally fully abstract, but I have been getting into what it means to allow for my mind to shift away from how I think it should be. Because if I'm being honest, when you were saying like things seem to come together and they have like an energy to them, I can also belabor that a lot. And I can at times. And I'm like, okay, first of all, what do I want to do here? And how am I going to do that? And if I'm too caught up in that, then that's really going to kind of get in the way. So, I've been making little abstract moments or kind of combining them with what I do and seeing what happens with that. And I think that's a really good, in the 30-minute exercise thing. I like to work on an iPad to do that, but I'll do it in a sketchbook as well, which is kind of great. So then I can get out of, you know, I don't know, maybe just getting caught up sometime too much.
Do you know what, I'll tell you, Fred, I've expanding more and more what I do. So I want to share something that we did on the retreat. So
Yeah,
I start with that exercise. I do an asemic drawing exercise where they scribble, and then I show them how I use those marks to build abstract, and how do I use those marks to build texture. But one of the things that we've done is, first I let them just do it on their own, and I play music while they do it,
yeah,
because I want them to feel how the song that they're listening to changes the marks they make.
yeah,
So
right.
we'll play some really happy song, and then a really angry song, and then a really mad song, a really depressed song, and watch them change. And they get frustrated because they're in the middle, right? And they're drawing, and suddenly I say, stop, flip the page, and I change the song.
Yeah,
And they're like, wait a minute, no, I like what I was doing, and I'm trying to teach them to just be in the moment. Well, I expounded that this time, and I gave them partners. So I call it asemic repetition. So you might like this in your class, but I put two people next to each other with one tablet, and I have them flip. One does a mark, then the other person reacts. Then one does a mark, and the other person reacts to that mark. So it's literally a back and forth pattern.
yeah. I
And
love that.
it's so fun. They really at first they're like, well, at first they fight each other, right? Like they draw the mark, and then the other person comes in and erases it, tries to undo it or cover it up. But then
Yeah,
they start getting into a rhythm, right? They're like, oh, I draw a triangle, then he draws a slash, and then I draw a triangle, then he draws a slash, and then suddenly they're building on each other's energy. I thought you might like that.
yeah. First of all, thanks. I mean, that's awesome that happens, but that is a great idea, actually, all the way around. Like, there's a reaction that happens, but then maybe even like a harmony that can come into play.
Yeah,
Like,
and it's something, what I like to talk about in the book is learning who you are and where you have resistance. And so if you don't have harmony, that's something you should know. Are you able to go along with it? Are you able to just go with the flow when you're creating, or do you get control-ish? Like, oh
well,
no.
it's what's working, right? I mean, a chapter about what's
Yeah,
working, right? Allowing that to
that
to be a part personally there too, right? Yeah, it's
right.
big.
I want to go back to how you work. Let's start with the beginning. Tell me, how do you start a painting? Do you sit down and think about what you want to say, or do you just put a canvas down and start, or how do you do it?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things like what might an idea be or what comes to mind to do. So there is definitely some planning there. I have made these little panels in the past. They're maybe like 12 by 12, and they'll have a phrase. Maybe it's a phrase I've heard or one that I've kind of invented. So there's definitely some planning with that because I'll put words on the thing and little funky characters in the middle of the words. But then like larger compositions, that could very well spring up from I'm looking at one thing, or I'll have this maybe a character or a bigger idea. Like, what happens if we're confronted in this kind of apocalyptic moments, or just sometimes like things just don't seem right in the world, and how can that be expressed? Because I definitely do typically have some kind of subject matter or form or something, right? Um, what things are going to help me, things meaning the characters or whatever, or the setting that I might put it into, what's going to maybe help to kind of push that narrative along. So I used to do a lot more sketching, like in a sketchbook, but sometime lately what I'm doing is just grabbing some things, setting them up, maybe take a picture, then maybe I'll work in an iPad and set something up, or even on my phone with a little Procreate Pocket app, or again, sketch it out. From there, then I'll go to the canvas, and I will say, getting back into abstracted space, I'm doing this because I'm working on something now, is something that oddly enough allows the idea to kind of maybe, it's not oddly enough, it allows the idea to become maybe more open and
Right.
possible, right? So going from those ideas to the canvas, I'll stop starting to allow, let something else emerge here. So I'm not really stuck on how that thing looked from the idea at first go. I will project, some elements onto, or if I get a sketch that I really like, I might project that on the canvas, but then see what happens when it comes to paint and color and things like that. So that's really how the process happens. The idea for something, see if it's connecting to what I'm doing. If not, maybe it'll take me some way, work that out a little bit, and then take that to canvas and then allow some freewheeling to happen. Or the freewheeling happens maybe as I'm sketching and planning, and then definitely try to keep that fresh if I want to make it larger, because that could be something now I'm like, oh, this is great. Now it has to be this way. And that's really not serving me or maybe what I'm trying to do
Yeah.
either, you know.
So you start. So what I'm hearing, and let me. So you just think you an idea comes to you, a concept, a feeling. I don't know.
Yeah.
And that's something for you to analyze. Is it a feeling or is it an idea? Like, does it come from your mind or does it come from your heart? And then you decide, how can I express that? And you start collecting things. Is that
Yes. Yeah. Collecting, or I have just my studios just like full of things that I can either put together or have put together in the past. And some of those are old toys, old, just all kinds of tchotchkes, or a lot of clay and then wire. And I'll literally build, forms with armature and then clay, and then add other elements to them. And then those could stand alone, or they'll become parts of the overall thing as well. The thing meaning painting or something like that. And I sometimes wonder when I'm thinking of these things, like, okay, what's really going to come out of this for people to maybe get? And I think, as we're artists, it's like we have to short circuit that, sometime, unless I'm making an illustration of something that's person picking an apple and eating it, right? Which is cool. But I have to allow myself to just let it be the way it is, while still wondering, what is it going to be communicated? For example, I have forms that might be pitted against each other, and duality is something that I think about a lot. And we think about that spiritually, like we live with this duality from the time we're born, but we're really not in this dual. I mean, this is millennia people pushing a duality, but there's the oneness of everything that I believe in. And I have this duality plays out because we're always seemingly pitted against each other. And
right?
then maybe there's this little moment that comes along, or you can find in the thing that gets you away from that. This things pitted against each other. And that's direct duality, right? Like, you don't like me, I don't like you. What are we going to do about it? And
Right.
a little harder to communicate those things, let's say spiritually, and I say that because I don't know that you would say that, because getting involved in a process and getting lost in it again, which you highlight in the book. I have to look at my notes here where that happens, right? But you get lost in that moment, and that's like a meditative state. I think it's
Right.
finding the spiritual that we talk about. And so we really get away from the duality. And so, when I think about, can I communicate that? Well, if I'm using symbolic forms, even if I make them, I might not. So that's why I'm starting to walk my way towards other possibilities for my own creating and maybe what people will get out of what I'm doing.
Well,
That's a whole lot of words
yep.
there.
No, it is, but it's coming from two different. It's funny. Um, I'm coming from the other direction. Is I've totally kept my stuff so abstracted, just shapes and colors. And now I'm planning a show for this fall here in Dallas, and the show is called Love Roller Coaster. So I'm pulling love themed music and doing panels to different songs. But I want not just happy songs, not just happy love songs, but lonely love songs or being
Yeah.
rejected. So um, and I'm finding myself pushing up against that abstract wall because I'm thinking, well, I kind of would like some iconic symbolism, some shapes like you're talking about in there. And so it's forcing me to think of that. How should I have a simple coffee cup in this image because it represents the song, that type of thing. And I just want to, before I forget this, I'd love to see a picture of your studio. I'd love to see all this stuff, right?
Yeah,
So,
right.
so anyway,
I'll send you one. I think I have a picture of, just like a, big image of something. Yeah, I could send it to you.
do you consider yourself an assemblage artist? Would you consider
I
yourself
would,
an
I
assemblage?
would say to a degree, yeah. I mean, I like to think maybe I put things together in a certain way at times, and that's can be an installation.
Uh-huh.
Um, but yeah, some kind of at times, it's interesting you mentioned that because I think about, when I found your book, I was really looking for what does it mean to be an artist? What does it mean to be spiritual? But along the way, when I was doing some searches, I found a great book called The Spiritual Moderns by Erica Doss.
Oh, I have to check
And
it.
so this is a talk about a history here. And one of the people in that American artist is Joseph Cornell. So his assemblage stuff that he put together. And I don't necessarily always do something like that, but there are times that I will. I mean, putting things together, and I like to think that I bring disparate things together. They will often turn out to be larger things, not so contained, or they'll be sculptures. They can be various sizes. But I do appreciate what can happen with assemblage work and see how that can unfold. But that was a great book. But then getting your book, and I'll get to that in a little bit when we can, about what's so different about it, because I want to wrap this into it. The first chapter, is it the first? No, the lesson's the first chapter, but the names, the various naming. You know, Symbolism is what I'm fighting, and you're talking about thinking about it and fighting it. Really does lock us into names for things, right? And I love that when you open with that chapter about, what's your name for it, or I had to think about, right? Because I live very often by symbolic language. I think you were maybe raised Catholic, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was Italian Catholic, and my mother's parents were from Italy. But there's symbolism everywhere. It's rich, it's wonderful. I mean, Hinduism, so many things. But those names very much can stop us from what we think of the source, and that symbolism then can stop us from maybe communicating something greater as well. So maybe I think for me, thinking about, well, how much is enough, or maybe I pare this down, or what if it's just that one thing and it's just right for what you were talking about? Seems like there's finding that balance, what works with that.
It's wow. I mean, there's like a whole bunch of stuff you said that's really I could grab
I
onto.
talk too much sometime. I got
No, no, no. You're a thinker. You're a thinker, and I love it. When you talk about symbology and all, I just came from a service, and I go to a very liberal spiritual center,
yes,
and she was referring to other religions, and someone at the end came in afterwards. She was done. Someone came up to me and said she didn't quote that right. That was wrong. She was talking about a specific religion,
yes,
and I thought to myself, that's the challenge with finding your spiritual center when you go back to any traditional religion, because every traditional religion has some sort of baggage involved, right? There's something,
Yeah.
there's the way they see it, the way they view the word. What does that mean when you say communion? What does it mean when you say absolve? All of a sudden you get into these debates. And so I realized, and Fred, I'm down. I feel like I'm getting my second book, and when I talk about spiritual, it's really about that. It's thinking on the conscious level, not on the physical level at all.
Yeah.
Duality is always on the physical. You can only be dualistic if you're a physical being.
Yes.
But if
Right.
you put your consciousness on the spiritual level, you can't help but see that we're all connected. Everything is connected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. 100%. I mean, that's beautiful. I mean, that's the thing that which I'm sure we know, and many of your listeners and viewers and the people who like your work and follow along probably know, that this notion of how many poles, like who's spiritual or who's religious, and I think it's a healthy thing to move, and one can stay and what their belief structure was, or how that works for community or whatever. But the notion of spiritual really gets us away from that, right? I mean, gets us into what you just described.
That's why with my second book, I'm not going to quote anything. I'm not going to pull in any traditional theology, because every time you do, it brings baggage. It's got some sort of baggage. And it doesn't matter what you're quoting, whether it's Buddhism or Judaism or whatever, there's issues. There's always different sides. So I ask people, when they think about spiritual, to think about that place of consciousness. So going back to your art process,
Yeah.
you're working in the spiritual plane when you're thinking of the idea of what you want to be, because there's nothing here, right? It's all, I want to express the frustration of dualism in our society and what's going on in this planet. It's in a dualistic. You're not moving anything physical. You're not
That's
going
right.
out and you're not marching. You're not holding a banner. You're not fighting. You're not shooting someone. You're up in the spiritual realm.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Right.
I mean, well, that's I mean, that's the thing that I think a lot of people might not understand, is what's happening here, right? And the connection for this is okay, the brain is a physical thing, but those things that can't quite be understood that happen, the thought or then the creative act that comes from that is definitely out there, but in us too, right? It's definitely in the spiritual. I think one of the parts in your book, which I want to ask you a question on too, is how you,
Okay.
you know, he's such a great artist and have a whole background too with what you were doing, and you said you decided you're going to start fully painting as well, is to be able to write. And I want to ask you that in just a moment, and to write really good books and to communicate. But towards the end of the book, look, we are all spiritual artists, what you're saying, right? So, and
Right.
if extend that for a moment, if we take the word artist away, we are all spiritual. We're not just this person going to this religious thing. I mean, our mind is thinking of stuff. And from that, maybe our soul is actually maybe directing that, as intuition and everything else. And I think that's really important to get to. I mean, it's been important for me to get to it. You mentioned you were involved in service today, and I wasn't in the city, but Marble Collegiate Church in Manhattan is something that I streamed today, but I often go there, which I love. And the history of that is Norman Vincent Peale was the preacher there
Oh, wow.
back. Um, but allowing that kind of the growth and to understand you're a part of the whole thing, and how do I know that? Because in my mind, brand new things occur, and
Yeah.
it's not tied to the baggage that gets caught up, I think is really, really important, you know?
Yeah.
I love how
Yeah.
you said it. You said it better because you can actually put things down in a way in a book.
Well, you mentioned, I would tell you a couple of things you mentioned earlier, that you write words down. So you're definitely verbal. You're definitely type oriented. And if like you were my student, I'd say you need to use a lot of words in your work. You need to write stuff in there because you're obviously word oriented. And also you mentioned that you're kinesthetic, because when you have three-dimensional objects and you're touching and pulling together, you're definitely motivated by kinesthetic. I was wondering, when you paint, do you ever just use your fingers? You know?
It might be maybe to like, move something or smooth something out. I will. not so much, but I will say I have a dear friend, great painter, Laurie Riccadonna, who, and I was grateful I was an adjunct professor of the program for a long time that she runs over in Jersey City, New Jersey. But she'll have students put on, gloves, non-latex gloves, and push paint around as an exercise. I think that's great. I should probably do that
I
more.
I think you should. I'm sorry. I hear that. I just think you should
Yeah,
because I think you're really going to like it.
yeah. And
Because you are.
I mean, that's part of the process in your retreats. And you don't work that way though, right? So,
I do a little bit, but no, I haven't much. But my tools keep getting broader. Um, and one of the things, the reason we were talking earlier about asemic drawing is I try to take people back to that childhood place they are before they get before conformity comes in, before they're told this is how you draw, this is how you feel, this is how colors should look, a tree should be green, and
yeah,
it's so limiting. So we go back in class and I let them do scribble marks, like when you're a little kid and you're sitting on the floor and you just scribble scrabble.
yeah,
That's getting back to your most basic. Who you are is how you draw a line. Do you drag it? Do you curl it? Do you do straight? Do you do it deep and hard? And then we come back outward from there and pick whatever can complement that. So,
yeah,
you know what I mean? Like you
yeah,
start with, what is your language? Do I like to use shapes? Do I like to use color? Am I more black and white? And once you figure that out, like you go out and then you go, oh, but I can add things. I could add three-dimensional objects to that, like you're talking
yeah,
about. And you sit
yeah,
in a room, and I think it's also teaching people to be in flow. So, you come up with your idea and then you want to stay in that state of flow. So when you go into your storeroom, you're like, oh my gosh, this feather. Well, I'm gonna use this feather with this yarn. And it's just like da 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 da, right? You're just in the sense of flow and it's joyous. And I have to tell you, your work looks like that. It looks very free.
Well, I really appreciate that, and I'm happy that that can be seen actually, because that's again, I said earlier, it's kind of the person that I am, and that comes out while not necessarily always thinking of some of the process you just described that you have students do, and people that do that. Which I'll plug again another chapter though, and I wrote it down, the rule of medium,
Oh
where
yeah.
you mentioned Sikmat and Haley, with flow. I mean, getting into that, and that's how do we maintain that is something though that if there's any feeling of that when you look at my work, I would say sometimes there's a battle to definitely try to maintain that, and I think that that's not a bad thing, to do
No.
that, and actually to do exercises to try to stay on top of it. And if it doesn't, sometime not hold it against myself or someone to hold it against himself. But I think it really keeps maybe why we want to do what we want to do, right? Is to not be tight about things, but find the challenges, know where we are, move them together, and keep moving it along and find ways to do that.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
mean,
it's about just being. When I was on the retreat, I was talking to my students, and we commented, because I would play music and they would do line work. That's in flow. But then when you step back and suddenly you apply all the knowledge, all the skills you have as a teacher, everything that told you how to composition, balance, the rule of odd numbers. I have the rule
yeah,
of the thirds and everything.
yeah,
Then you come back and you apply those rules. I call it more of a meditative state. Then you're like in the mind and you're meditating. And that's when you come back and you might say, okay, this feather doesn't work, right?
yeah,
I felt it. All right. I felt it at the time, but you know what?
yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, that's like a really, like, the whole process becomes an organic kind of thing, and if you can keep that going, right, and maintain that, I think one of the good things that I think a lot of people experience at some point, and I try and remind people, and actually students sometimes, is we're not sometimes aware we're in that process, and just how um, what would the word be? It's not just uplifting. I mean, it's a growth thing there. If you recognize that, you can actually grow yourself with that, your
Right.
mind and into spirit, knowing that it's a process. One doesn't need to only sit down and meditate to maybe literally sitting 20 minutes, but one can get into that way of being and grow oneself out through the creative process for these things you're describing and what happens with that. Like, guess what? That was just an hour and a half of doing something like, whoa, what just happened there? And that's one thing. Now, I was clean in the spirit doing this, and I can come back then and then do some analyzation of it, and think about it. And like you said, from the mind, and meditating on it that way, and bring some craft even or something, and kind of harmonize everything within the self, as a creator, or just whatever anybody wants to do.
Definitely. I tell students, sometimes I'll throw a canvas against the wall right now. Sometimes I have to ignore it for 2-3 weeks. Sometimes I've ignored a painting for 6 months.
Yeah. Do you turn it away from you? Or you keep
Yeah, I turn it away from me so that when I walk around and turn it back, I see it with fresh eyes. And then sometimes I'll hear that click. And so I tell a student, if you don't instinctively feel the next move, if you don't feel the next move, stop, go to another painting or
Yeah.
another project. And they'll say, well, I don't know what to do next. Okay, well, then stop and walk away. One of the things we did on the last day of class, which was a lot of fun, is we all worked on the same panel. So we did a movement exercise in a circle, and the first person would do a movement, and we had to follow her or him around the room. When he came up to the easel, he hit it with something, whatever color, whatever feeling he felt, he just hit it. And then he goes to the back of the line, and then the next person will do a different move. They'll be like, and so that was that movement exercise. And at the end, we looked at it, and it was my turn to do something. And I walked up and I just signed the name. I signed my name because I said to them, I don't feel an impulse. It's done. It's balanced. It's got texture, composition, colors coming through. Everything looked really great. And so I didn't feel comfortable hitting it with something. And so learning when you should keep going and when you should stop,
Yeah.
I don't know about you. I've ruined so many paintings because I force it. I'm going to make this happen today. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to get this done, or else I'm like, look, I really need to leave, but I just messed something up, and that can actually mean something, right? I don't know that maybe anything's ever fully messed up, but the notion of I don't want it that way, I have to somehow redirect it, can really can be mind-boggling. I love that, knowing when something is finished. I know we've all heard that, right? I know you have to say, how do you know, or how does someone know? And I think it's interesting that you had a whole group of people coming together, and you're like, look, I don't need to do anything else. I'm going to put my name on here. What was the reaction of everyone? Did everyone step back also and say, you've made sense by saying it's complete?
Yeah, it's funny. They said, "Are you going to put that in your next show?"
Yeah.
And I said, "No, I wouldn't do that because they all worked on it." But it was true. I mean, I would have done honestly, Fred, I would have done something if I felt it like a fix. You know how you see something and you get to that point where you just know it needs balance, it needs this, it needs that. It's but it didn't. It seriously didn't. And I thought, well, this is a good opportunity for them to see. And if you're truly present, if you're truly practicing presence when you create art, you have to listen to what you hear. Well, let me rephrase that. You should listen to what you hear, right? Because sometimes we don't. Sometimes
Yeah,
we go
that's right.
against it. But I heard it's done. It's done.
Yeah. And
And
that's, what's really interesting about that, to go back to symbolic language. You go back to like Genesis or something, a biblical thing. But that's it. It's done. It's ready to roll. The creation is done, kind of thing. And we can have it in our own head and know that too, because we're creating something, and and it's done, and we should trust that sometimes. You yeah, trust is an interesting thing too, right? Because for me, because I'll think I have something completely done, and you know it is, but I don't trust myself enough, and the confidence will come over something. And so getting into that kind of higher, not higher because it's within us, but that feeling of that spiritual frame of reference can really alleviate that, or whatever the word is, like get me out of not, get me away from not being able to trust. Say that's it, that's good. This is what I've created here. And maybe it's not just me, the channel of it's all happening, channeling through and making it happen. And let that be, I think, is very important. You know? It's important for me because then it becomes an issue of, am I growing as a person? Can I trust myself with that? Well, at the same time saying, no, there's definitely something wrong here with the aesthetic that you want and change it, which is very different than doubting myself or not allowing myself to stay in that moment, you know, that kind of spiritually minded moment.
Yeah, it's interesting what you're saying because it's making me think how do you discern that? How do you discern between a clear decision of knowing what to do? Doubt is almost indecision. It's almost, right? It's that place
Yeah.
where you're not one way or the other. You're just you don't know. So I don't know except for practice, um, how you would refine that. It has to be a strong impulse, and a clear impulse, um, when you make the move. But I don't know how you would deal with doubt. And I think the best way, like you were saying with doubt, maybe the best way is to step away because, people forget that doesn't mean you can't hit it with a color or change it the next
Yeah.
day. It's not, it's never over,
It's
right?
never over. Yeah.
It's
Or I
never
mean,
over.
yeah, and one can also just be like, it's gone. You know, it's in one of your references, I think, was Elizabeth Gilbert from that Big
Yeah.
Magic. And I think the idea gets away and someone else picks it up. And you know, well, sometime that might happen, or maybe in a certain sense, nothing is ever really wrong, right? I mean, even when one is doubting or a level of confidence or something, you know, it's allow yourself to be and just be, you know, and not hit yourself over the head all the time with a hammer about it. But yeah, you know, I actually, when I'm teaching, I tell people like it's very hard for me to scrape something away, but I've started to do that if I want to, or just paint over it. And I'm telling people you should do that. So I'm also very honest with them and I'll be like, look, it's not the end of the world either here. You know, return to it or scrape something off or paint over it or whatever, and see what happens. And we have to be able to do that when we're alone in our quiet space of the solitude wherever we're working, is to be like, come back to it. And don't go crazy over this and get back to that channel where it first started, where it was first inspired to happen.
Uh, yeah. I think that comes down to, and one of the things I really do spend time on with on the retreats and in the book is recognizing your wholeness from the very beginning. So when you approach the creative process just as an expression and no longer as a way to prove your value, right?
Yeah.
And it's hard. We are taught from the very beginning in society. Like you'll meet an artist, and the next question is, "Do you sell your work?" Like,
Yeah.
oh, well, if I sell my work, then I'm a qualified artist. And I'm like, that's not true. That's not
That's
true at
right.
all. But we want to qualify whether or not it's successful. But I think just the act of creativity is successful. Just being in it, just being in it. And so I tell people, my students, I say, on the first day when we were on the retreat, I sit there, I want you to recognize right now, Jackie, you're perfect. You're perfect
Yeah,
just now.
that's
I don't
true.
care if you don't even paint. In fact, I want you to stop even thinking about, I don't want you to think I have to paint something perfect on this retreat because I have to show everybody that I am an artist. I said, you don't. This is the time where you're just throwing stuff down and you're practicing texture, you're practicing new lines, and you're discovering new ways of being. It is not a performance. We're not trying to show who we are, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean that's incredible. I mean, wow. I mean, think about titles of oneself and identifying, you know, with that, and it gets in the way of so many things, right? The qualifiers that, you know, I was for a while. I was looking just a few weeks ago, and Hilma af Klint, who
Oh.
was the great abstract painter even before even before Kandinsky, it turns out, and you know, this whole notion of looking at, you know, where someone is in making something without necessarily identifying who they are or what they are. And I mean, that goes in so many ways of how people engage in this process of creating and being something. if there's a recognition of something, or you have to be that way, or materiality, the material world, as Kandinsky was referring to, you are going to get trapped in it. It happens all the time. Well, now I'm a painter and this has to happen, or why aren't you doing that? Or is it just a hobby? And it's like, life isn't a hobby here, right? I mean, we're creative beings, we're spiritual beings. It's what we are. Let's take some of those name badges off or title badges off for a moment, because it's kind of it's pushed on us, right? And it's great. I mean, anything that can happen that you want to have happen and you set goals to do it, that's fine. But if it gets in the way, of your mental state, or again, connecting to spirit, and go back and think again, just that impulse to do the thing, to make something, right? I
Right.
mean, to paint something and push all those other things out of the way for a while. And that's a much more healthy approach. 100%.
Definitely. When you, in a weird way, when you go with labels and names, that's all duality, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
there it is again.
You're this, I'm that.
Yeah,
I tell my students, that I finally got to a point where I wasn't concerned about finishing the painting. It wasn't a test about finishing the painting. And this goes back to, you asked me earlier, you said you want to practice being in the flow.
yeah,
I started measuring, how long can I stay in flow? Like, how long can I drag this feeling out where I'm just reacting and flowing? And the longer I could do it, the better. And it
yeah,
didn't matter if I turned around and the painting was shit. I mean, it was like brown and horrible and dark and scratched, because I just spent an hour, whoa, like free
yeah,
flowing and just feeling it, and just in
yeah.
that space of timelessness. It didn't matter anymore. And so I would encourage the listeners to do that. Practice staying in that place, just that place of fun,
You,
you know?
you know, if you asked someone to sit and do a sitting meditation with a mantra or not, just focused for an hour, it would drive, well, it could drive me crazy. I mean, I use a mantra when I do meditate, but I mean, get somebody working on something, especially, let's say painting for sure. And, and even if they aren't a painter, like you're a painter, right? Um, and it'd be like, guess what you just did for an hour? You know what I mean? I mean, where was your mind? Like, I don't know, it was somewhere here. All the chatter and everything is out. All the labels, all the things, all the duality is out. I mean, it's really an incredible thing. I think it should be something that, we talk about the arts in school, K through 12 and everything, and it's battles back and forth, depending where you live or what happens or the funding for it. But this kind of thing, not just learning about fundamentals of aesthetics and color and everything, because kids do it naturally, but let people, and never let them stop. Get in that moment, just let go of that flow moment. Really is a meditative state too. I think it's incredible, and then you did it for an hour. I mean, think about it. That's a lot. That's sustained.
Yeah, and you're right. As kids, we have it. We have it. We sit
Yeah.
there. I remember sitting down at my neighbor's house with Cheryl Harrison, just coloring and playing, and hours would go by, and
So
then we
what
get
happens
all
when you're writing? What happens when you're writing? I mean,
okay.
can you do that when you're writing, or when you're thinking of a new book, or how these things, do they unfold the way you might be working in that best moment when you're painting like that?
Yeah, they do. It's very similar. I'll get a concept or an idea, and then my mind will start organizing it. So it is the mind involved to a point. You're right. But the mind will start organizing it, and then I just have to write it. And sometimes, my friend is this dictation tool now they have in Word.
Yeah, that's
I mean, I
right.
type fast, but now I've learned to just turn on the dictation tool and just get it down. And
Yeah,
and the similarity is, don't worry about punctuation, don't worry about perfection, just get the concept down. Then that's all flow, right? I'm
yeah,
thinking about this, da, 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 da. There's a lot of duality in the world. And I see duality, and you write it all down, and then you can go into what I call, editing, which is the meditative state, the state where you're editing it. You're
yeah,
focused, your mind is involved. So I do. I just get an idea and it just flows through me. And it's practicing letting that consciousness, you're tapping in. So when you write, Fred, you're tapping into that the one mind.
yeah,
And we all have it. It's sort of, it's just like she talked about in that book, a creative, how the idea will go on to the next person if you don't grab it down, because it's one
yeah,
mind.
yeah. Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
interesting. I'm finding that all over the world, people have responded to this book because I think people are ready to start thinking on a more of a spiritual level.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
I would encourage you to sit down and turn on your microphone, do a little, whatever you need to do, like 10 minutes of quieting or meditation, not a whole hour. And then just go with it. Just either say it or type. I don't know how fast you type, but just let it
I think I
happen.
used to do 30, 40 words. I mean, I did learn how to type as a kid.
But you know what? Don't focus on editing it. Don't focus about,
Uh,
oh, wait a minute, I forgot this point. Just keep saying, keep talking, keep talking, keep talking, keep talking.
you
It's
know,
sort of,
another
yeah.
so another person, Stephen Pressfield, The War of Art, is a great book, The War of Art and Turning Product. I mean, he kind of talks a bit about that. I mean, you're different angles in a way in terms of books and things like that, the things that he has for that. But if you don't put it down, get it down and just then let it go kind of thing, I think is, and that can not just be with writing too. We should do that too, I think, with anything we're doing, I would imagine. But if you don't do that, then even if it's not lost and someone else picks it up, you may never just get it back. It could just be lost forever, right? You
I'm serious. I feel that way at my age. I'll tell you, if I don't write it down, it's gone, man. I even
know?
have I use my notes on my phone. Use that
Yeah,
note. I'll just say it. Like if I'm driving, I'll turn on my notes and I'll just start talking. Okay, this is the concept I want to talk about. Da, 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 da. You know.
yeah. Same thing. I actually have yeah, I have a date planner, still paper one, but notes on my phone in the sketchbook. And what's funny is you come back, I could come back a year later because I have piles of sketchbooks. Like I completely forgot that note that was so important. So there you go. It could be gone, but you can always maybe bring it back to fits too. So
That's exactly right. I mean, you just keep. That's why it takes a while to write because you'll put it down and then another concept will pop up and you'll get it.
well, it's
Um,
beautiful writing that you have too, and it flows and it makes sense. And I'm saying that as a reader. I mean, I've never really approached trying to ever write, and nor would I. But I think it's important if a book can first connect, and then how it's put out. There's some logic too, but also just like life flows through the spiritual artists who designed to create your book. Um, the language that it's interesting, the written word and being able to talk to you this way. I mean, it's feels really that the words are there. And I think that's an amazing thing, I guess maybe people who can also write or the authors, that's the case. But I get it now firsthand talking to you this way. And the book will flow even that much more, if I read through again and do things or for the next book that comes out.
Yeah, I feel like I've been featured on a lot of different podcasts. They're actually having me come in, and the more I talk about it, the better my languaging is getting. And I think that's why I've decided, okay, I want to write a second book, and it's a little broader because it's not just about art; it's just about getting spiritual. Putting
Yeah,
spiritual first. And when you encounter a problem in your marriage, or when you encounter a problem at work, go to the spiritual plane. And what I mean by that is go and look at the spiritual truth of it. What's
yes,
causing it? What's behind it? You know,
yeah, exactly.
sometimes, and then that's the way to fix it. See, here in the West, we want to fix things by always moving the rock, right? We want to physically move the rock. But sometimes if we just sit down and get spiritual and think about, wait a minute, water could displace that rock. And
Yeah,
if I open this gate right here, or I open this hose, I can move that rock with water. I don't have to physically move it. So
yeah,
it's the idea, the consciousness is stronger, way stronger than physical action. We're still working so much on the physical plane.
we are. Which again, because we're trapped in the notion of duality, we're not. But it's almost everyone is. This is where you are, and this world, you know what I mean? And you're stuck in it, and it's like, oh, no, let's open up here and think about even within this living in this physical realm, where our mind can change things, move a rock with water, that kind of thing. I mean,
Yeah,
that takes a
yeah,
while.
it does. And so I want to write a book to help people think that, like, if you're having an argument with your wife or your partner and they say, hey, you're not helping me around the house. Well, you could go and you could immediately, the first reaction is, okay, I'll empty the dishwasher. But the higher action, the spiritual action, is to realize that your partner doesn't feel appreciated.
That's
and
right.
or supported. And if you go to that level and say, okay, what is it? What do you need from me? They're going to say, I need you to empty the dishwasher. But really, you want to get to that. No, what do you really need from me? And maybe that person just needs to be reaffirmed that you're there for them. Or maybe that you say that, I want you to know that you mean everything to me. And this has nothing. The fact that I didn't empty the dishwasher is because I'm so busy this week has nothing to mean about how much I love you. Right.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
suddenly you go to the spiritual plane and you can move it, you know?
yeah. That's great. I
Yeah.
mean, it's communicating, and many of the things that we know are there, and then step back and but we don't, or we learn them and then apply them. It's 100%.
Yeah. So I love so much of what you're saying and how you're absorbing it. Um, I, before I ask you if there's anything else you want to share, you have so much to talk about, and you're one of those people. I talk to some people every once in a while. I'm like, oh, this guy could be. We'll have to bring him back, down the line, because the fact that you're a teacher, the fact that you really understand the spiritual aspect, we could just go on and on. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I really enjoy. Well, I talk about this to friends sometimes as well, and people I get to meet, and I hope one can create community with someone like yourself and appreciate what you do. You can spend hours and hours talking about things, and you're like, wow, where'd the day go? That kind of thing. And if it's not just if it's focused then too, and people can have different opinions about stuff, you can really get engagement and actually build, again, communication with a partner and people, but also just talking about things, and all of a sudden other things come out. It's like a mind spirit, the connection with the whole everyone's mind. And then, well, what about that, and what about that? And I was just listening to you, and you're saying things that it would make me think of something to talk about. And I think that that's great. And it doesn't always have to be that we're on the same wavelength completely, but I think that the being open and communicating is the way to be, and
Well,
and I have to
yeah.
say, I've thought for a long time, well, what happens if one were to do podcasts? And I've had like performance character that I've done and stuff, but I have to say,
Uh,
when I see people who actually do things, and there's a positive thing that's springing out of it, it helps me to grow, like what you've been doing, and I know other people as well. I'm just like, I'm going to let those people do it, and I'm going to say my prayers and send my blessings, and hope for them, and just keep following them and growing from what they're doing, what you're doing, and other people too. It's great.
So you did it again, Fred. You said like three things I have to respond to. So we didn't even get to talk about that. I Googled it. I looked you up online and started looking at your resources and saw these character sketches and stuff that you do. And I'm like, oh man, this is so great. It's a whole nother thing, right? Whole nother thing about being impulsive and just being in the moment.
Yes.
And yeah, and then you're also talking about, I think what I heard you saying is when you have a challenge in your life, if you clear a space and set the intention, okay, my intention is that I need to make more money. Suddenly, when you're talking to people like this, they will give you an idea, and they don't even know that that's your intention. They don't know that your intention is to make more money, but they'll say something like, "Oh my gosh, I never thought about that, but you know what? I could do that, and I could make money from moving rocks." You know what I mean? You just got right. It's like, I can
Yeah.
start moving rocks with water, but that's how I call it creative intelligence. So I'm really coming closer to my term for this power, this greater power. Some people call it, divinity or God. For me, I think it's the creative intelligence. It's this
Yeah.
intelligence that's in all things about creativity, about creation. How does it expand? How does it grow? So I think what you're saying is when you have these conversations, suddenly you go, oh yeah, that's
Yeah.
synchronicity,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Right. 100%.
Yeah,
Absolutely. That's that's really it. I'm hoping the 21st century, and we still have 3/4 of it to go, that more of that, more the dialogue or the back and forth of people growing into things would happen too.
definitely. I hope so too. If we can get there, with the way things are going.
Yeah.
So is there anything that you wanted to share with the listeners that I haven't brought up? Something that if you're doing a show coming up or anything that you want to share?
Well, I just to share, I will be. I was invited because I had submitted for it to be in a show. I think it opens in June. You were invited to submit work, and if you were selected, then you would make a small 10 by 10 painting. That'll be at Bridget Meyer Gallery in Philadelphia. I've never really had association with the gallery. I follow her and her gallery on Instagram, and she has this art MBNA thing. I think is really kind of nice to follow. So I'm
Cool.
working on completing a piece for that. And I highly recommend some to plug some people as well, not only your podcast, but Patty Johnson has one, Art Problems. That's a really good podcast as well. And yeah, I'm just going to be working and looking forward to getting to one of your retreats and seeing when the next book comes out and following along with you and everyone else that I can see on Instagram and YouTube and everything else.
Yeah, this has been great. I love that we connected on Instagram, that we follow each other, and I love seeing your work, and you always make me laugh. And I love it because honestly, Fred, it's so different from what I do. For me, it's so, and yet, I'm working on it. I'm working on it, right? But it's
Well,
so different than what I do.
well, I have to say, I mean, obviously, as I am, my saying anything here is that thank you for having me. Thank you for what you're doing. That goes across so many things. Your work, how you talk about your work on visible channels like Instagram and other things that social ways that people can get. Um, how you communicate that, which is not just the physical work then, but in part of your life that and how that fits into it that you write about and what you share and what you talk to people about. And the most recent podcast that I was listening to and the people that you get, when you share with people on that. I mean, it just can't be overstated. Just how I say how important it is, and I thank you for what you're doing.
Oh, well, thanks for being on the show. Um, I apologize for, I feel like we got a rescue dog.
Yeah,
Listeners,
Baxter, right?
this,
Baxter.
yeah, we got a little
Yeah.
Baxter, a rescue dog, just last Wednesday, and the dog is like 3 rooms over, but you can hear him whimpering, or at least I'm hearing him whimper, and I apologize that I don't usually do that, and I'll make sure he's on the far end of the house. But he's a cute little dog.
Looks like it. I saw the picture. Well, our
Yeah.
cat Gatsby was playing with these little bird things that'll activate every time he plays with them. I'm like, is that being picked up on the
I
on his?
didn't hear it though. Good. I haven't heard it, but I can hear Baxter, and I'm like, oh, come on, Bubba, come on, don't be doing this to me. So anyway, so listeners, I'm also going to work on a separate video that will be on my YouTube channel, just talking about the retreat and a little bit what we do. I'm excited to have a retreat this November, and what happened was we've extended it. It's going to be 4 days now instead of 3 because my attendees told me it wasn't long enough, that there was so much information they wanted it to be longer. And then also next spring, I'm having a retreat in Santa Fe. I encourage you to go to my website, Spiritual Artist Today, and look it up and read about the retreat. It's going to be really exciting. Melanie Brennan, she is a trained golden instructor. She'll be assisting me. Beautiful wall of windows looking at the mountains. We will have all sorts of incredible things, a labyrinth walk. So mixing spirituality and making art together, which is fun. So follow this podcast, follow me on YouTube, and I'm having a show in Louisville right now. It's called The Emotional Roller Coaster, and it's on through May 23rd. I encourage you to go by and see it. So Fred, thanks a lot, man. Definitely have to come back and talk about your performance. Some of the stuff you do for performance. But I
I will.
love the fact that you're so out of the box and you're definitely an individual. And
Yeah, thank you so much. Really,
so
really.
all right, we will talk to you soon, and thanks again for being on the Spiritual Artist Podcast.
Thank you so much, CJ. Take
Okay.
care. All right.
Thanks again for listening to the Spiritual Artist Podcast. Whether you're watching this show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, or iHeartRadio, make sure you choose the subscribe button so that you will receive updates when new segments are released. Most importantly, be still, listen, and know that you are a spiritual artist.